What a wonderful crowd. Good evening, everybody. I'm Lynn Videcka, the Dean of the Silver School of Social Work, and I am thrilled to welcome you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Silver School of Social Work's 50th anniversary, and throughout the year, we've had a series of special lectures and events. The school's anniversary has provided us the chance to reflect on the school's accomplishment, its clinical excellence, but also has given us the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to social justice, joining with colleagues throughout the university, including those from the Center for Multicultural Education and Programs and their intergroup dialogue program. This 50th anniversary has also pointed us toward our future as an international leader in the field of social work education. Today, the social work vision is more important than ever before. We are the professionals who serve the most socially disadvantaged people in our society, who respond to emergencies and trauma, who provide care at the end of life, and we are the change agents for social empowerment, serving communities and building progressive social policies and services. The Silver School has been a proud leader in social work education for 50 years, training over 13,000 social workers to create positive change in society, affecting lives around the world. Tonight is the grand finale of the school's 50th anniversary celebration. We are marking it with this special conversation. We're also marking it with the Student Scholarship Benefit Dinner, which will follow the conversation. Tonight's conversation is the celebration of the engaged scholarly mission of our school. It will focus on social and personal identities and will feature our special guests, President John Sexton, Henry Louis Gates, and Carol Gilligan. Let me introduce each of our guests to you. John Sexton. John Sexton is the 15th president of New York University and is also the Benjamin Butler Professor of Law and the NYU Law School's Dean Emeritus. He served as dean for 14 years. John joined the law school faculty in 1981, was named the school's dean in 1988, and was designated the university's president in 2001. His tenure as president has been marked by a university that has grown faster than ever in terms of prospective student interest, academic rigor, and competitiveness. NYU's desirability and student body are thriving. John holds many leadership roles in higher education across the country, including the presidency of the American Council of Education. He's recognized as the most visionary leader in American higher education and is defining NYU as a global network university. Under John Sexton's administration, the university has built on its traditional identity of being an institution that is in and of our great New York City to being one that is also in and of the world. With 12 international academic centers spanning 5 continents and opening the Portal campus in Abu Dhabi this past September, it's the first comprehensive liberal arts and sciences campus in the Middle East to be operated by a major American research university. NYU has become a truly global network university. I want to personally thank John for honoring the school tonight by joining us for this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, President John Sexton. We are really thrilled to have Henry Louis, better known as Skip Gates. I'm going to get to call him Skip after tonight, so I'm going to feel special privilege. Dr. Gates is the Alphonse Fletcher University Professor and Director of the W.E. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research at Harvard University. Professor Gates is editor-in-chief of TheRoot.com, a daily online magazine focusing on issues of interest to the African American community and written from an African American perspective. He is also editor of the Oxford African American Studies Center, the first comprehensive scholarly online resource in the field of African American and Africana studies. Professor Gates has led the development of African American and Africana literature and art. His work spans scholarly venues, public policy issues, and the arts. His most recent book, In Search of Our Roots, which expands on interviews he conducted for his critically acclaimed multi-part PBS documentary series, African American Lives 1 and 2. An influential cultural critic, Professor Gates has written for Time Magazine, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. Before joining the faculty of Harvard in 1991, he taught at Yale, Cornell, and Columbia. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming one of America's most influential men of letters, Dr. Henry Louis Gates. And now it's my real privilege to introduce Carol Gilligan to you. Named by Time Magazine as one of the 25 most influential Americans, and I know she's been one of the 25 most influential scholars in the field of social work. Her work has really transformed our field as it has so many others. Carol's landmark book, In a Different Voice, is described by Harvard University Press as, quote, the little book that started a revolution. She's co-authored or edited 5 equally powerful books since then, and we look forward to her forthcoming book, The Deepening Darkness, Patriarchy, Resistance, and Democracy. Carol Gilligan was a member of the Harvard faculty for over 30 years, initiating the Harvard Project on Women's Psychology and Girls' Development. And in 1997, she became Harvard's first professor of gender studies. In 2002, she became a university professor, our highest stature professor at New York University. She has affiliations in the School of Law, Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Carol Gilligan is currently teaching a seminar at the law school on resisting injustice. And she teaches an advanced research seminar on the listening guide method of psychological inquiry. Hear that, social work doctoral students? That's a relevant course for you. Yeah. Gilligan is also a visiting professor at the University of Cambridge and affiliated with the Center for Gender Studies. Her work has had a profound influence on social work, bringing the voice of women to the forefront of our field. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carol Gilligan. So it's my privilege to begin the conversation tonight. This is going to be as informal and spontaneous as we can make this conversation. I have no doubt it will be with these 3 luminaries who are pretty loose, I have to tell you, based on our earlier conversation. But let me get the conversation started. In anticipating this historic conversation, President Sexton and I spoke about its themes. John impressed me that identity would be one of the most important themes of the evening. I would like to ask the 3 of you to begin your conversation by sharing your views of identity formation in American society today. What does your work tell us about identity development and how social constructs such as race, gender, and religion influence individuals' identity?
Okay. Can I start?
Sure. First of all, what?
I guess the answer is no.
I just want I want everybody to understand the dynamic here because poor Lynn has a tiger by the tail. The simple fact is, and I think this will become evident to all of you that watch, is that we're dealing here with. No, I don't want to shake hands with you. This is you got three good friends here.
Old friends.
Very old friends. And Carol influenced the most magnificent person I've ever met, my wife, and was her teacher. And Skip, who knew Lisa from the time they were both freshmen in college.
1969.
1969, has publicly professed his love for her. So this is not just your average panel. With that all, so you know something about identity?
No, I don't know anything about it. But I wanted the reason I asked to go first was because I wanted to say something about social work. How many of you remember East Side, West Side on TV? You remember that?
Sure.
And that was my introduction. I grew up in Piedmont, West Virginia, a little village, I call it, but the people from there say I should say it's a small city. It has 1,000 people, so you call it whatever you want to call it. Halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, but we got cable. You know, people up here think cable was invented for yuppies in New York City. It was invented for people in the country in 1949, 1950, and one of the first places to have it was our little hamlet in the hills of West Virginia. And so we had all these great TV shows, and one was East Side, West Side, which was memorable if you were black, because Cicely Tyson was in it with George C. Scott, and she had an afro, or she had what we called a natural, very short, unstraightened hair. So it was quite shocking, because that's the first head like that I had ever seen, the first afro hairstyle in the early 60s, but it was my first engagement with social work. And I was so moved. I was raised like many smart little black boys and girls at the time. I was raised to be a doctor. But I thought, after I watched that show every night for a season, that being a social worker was like sitting at the right hand of God, because it was such difficult work and so important work. And unlike doctors, you didn't get paid. You didn't have the respect the doctors do. And I always admired the ideal of social work, and as I've gotten to know people who do social work and people who teach social work, my admiration has only gone up. So I applaud this school on its 50th anniversary, and I thank you, dear Dean, for inviting me, and thank you for your commitment to social work.
Thank you.
Now answer the question.
The problem with identity, as we've constructed it, is that we all have multiple identities. Mm-hmm. For instance, I just introduced you to the small town of Piedmont, West Virginia. It's as important to me that I'm a West Virginian as that I'm an African American, though it wouldn't have occurred to you when I walk out onto this stage, there goes a West Virginian, right? It is as important to me that I've had maybe a dozen operations on my right leg after I broke my hip when I was 14, and it was misdiagnosed, which leaves me permanently, officially handicapped. I don't know if you've ever had a serious operation, but I have, and when they, you're basically naked, covered with this little flimsy thing, and you have IVs in you, and they're about to put you to sleep, and you don't want it to hurt, and you want to wake up, and you don't want to die. The last thing on my mind when I am being carted into the operating room is that I'm a black man. I am a human being who is about to suffer a very traumatic operation. So only certain identities are privileged. And what you see might not be what's going on in my head. Like being a woman might not be the most important thing to you, or being college president, or being a Roman Catholic, or whatever. So yes, being an African American, I make my living teaching about African and African American studies. I loved it. I fell in love with it when I was 15 years old. 14 years old, the summer of the Watts riots, you remember that. And I was at an Episcopal church camp in West Virginia, and everybody there was white. I mean, how many black Episcopalians are in the world, let alone how many black West Virginia Episcopalians? There were 3 black kids, and we got the news. We couldn't read newspapers, and except on Sunday. We'd been there in isolation for a week. We were having a really good time. And there was this headline that Negroes riot in some place called Watts. I didn't know what a riot was. I didn't know if it meant that Negroes, as we would have said then, were being killed by white people, or were they killing white people? And this very sensitive New England Episcopal priest, that night, he could see the look on my face because all the white kids were looking at me for my reaction. And that night, he gave me a copy of a book, and it was called Notes of a Native Son. And it had this black author, a black man's picture. And I looked at it and I thought, could this man be the author? And I read it, and I used to keep a notebook, a commonplace book. And that night, I would transcribe any beautiful passage that named something that I felt but hadn't articulated, and I would write it out longhand. And ladies and gentlemen, I found myself transcribing every paragraph, every word in every paragraph, every page of this book by James Baldwin. And I was hooked. And I would eat books written by black authors. And it took me a long time to abandon my mother and father's dream for me to become a doctor. But this is a case where my most visible identity became my identity as a professional person in the society. So to wrap up, I think that it's very important that we celebrate our various identities, our ethnic identities, our religious identities, but it is important for us as academics to teach our students, particularly those who define themselves through those identities, that the more important identity is to be a citizen of the world, to be cosmopolitan, is to be a human being, is to transcend the specificity of one's identity and empathize across these identity barriers. Otherwise, we're doomed as a people, as a civilization.
So, first of all, I want to join Skip in celebrating social workers and social work. I think you people are on the front lines. And when I started writing about resistance and children's ability to resist forces in the society that would silence some of these multiple voices inside them, I thought social workers are the people who are in touch with the resistance. So I've had enormous admiration for you. I've worked closely with social workers. I'm delighted to be here and celebrate the 50th anniversary of this school. Listening to Skip, I wondered if he was going to talk about gender, because I could talk about race then. But since he, you know, because it goes both ways.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me, all the talk about identity, because among my many identities, as a Jewish woman, I also was supposed to either be or marry a doctor. Which I actually married once, so that relieved me from having to be one, so I could do other things. But it often strikes me, we talk these days about people and as if we're either shaped by our genetic heritage or our biology, or else shaped by our psychology and by our culture or our society. But among my identities, I'm a psychologist. So I'm always listening for the voice that speaks of the unique, irreplaceable, completely idiosyncratic human being who inhabits all these multiple identities. And because I think that's really the voice of the hope that Skip articulated, that whatever other identities we have, we're human beings. But I will say something about gender, since my former colleague from Harvard decided not to. You see, I mean, since he's a man, he doesn't talk about gender. Since I'm perceived as white, I don't talk about race. Except, of course, I grew up as Jewish, so I never thought of myself as white, I have to tell you. That's something probably you didn't know. But the issue of identity was focused for me sort of once and for all by a woman who I interviewed when I was working as a research assistant in the late 1960s and asking people questions about moral development, you know, And I asked this woman, I posed this dilemma that psychologists use to assess people's level of moral development, and she looked at me and she said, "Would you like to know what I think, or would you like to know what I really think?" And I think that a lot of the struggles around identity, certainly for women, but I think for many, many other people, is, and I'm trying to think how to say that the moment where you free yourself to say what you really think. Your turn, John.
So as we begin, I want to add the word of congratulations to the Silver School and to all who embrace the kind of helping, other-directed, altruistic, spectacularly virtuous mission of social work. You know, NYU is a school that embraces the entire spectrum of human behavior and commits itself to addressing that behavior as it is. You know, this was, you know, we were founded to be both in and of the city and to touch the lives of humans in a way that was uncharacteristic of the universities at the time that we were founded. So it would be unthinkable for us not to have and to feature a school of social work, and with the spectacular help of Connie Silver and with a phenomenal dean who has graced our campus now and graced your school. And I want to emphasize the fact that you and Silver should understand the way we in the university community outside of Silver feel about her. I just want to salute not only social work and the School of Social Work in this wonderful moment, but a spectacular colleague and dean.
Hear, hear.
So we're in the presence of two people who've thought profoundly and affected the way our society thinks profoundly about the issue of identity. I'll share with you an anecdote and a comment about where I think we are as humankind on this issue. First of all, the anecdote. Skip has been in my life, as Carol has, since 1975. Both of them gifts from Lisa. But although Skip became part of our social family and really part of our family, Carol came into my life as more than a concept and an influence in the 90s as we were building the faculty of NYU Law School. And there came a moment where I had not yet begun my now more than decade-old conversation with Skip about why he should come to NYU. By the way, is there anybody here today that thinks it would be a good idea if Skip came to NYU? Okay. Just want to make sure I was on the right track here. But he's slow to learn. But
I'm halfway here.
Yeah. But there came a moment where I brought 4 people, all of whom knew each other, into my office in the late 1990s. This was my office as dean of the law school. And the 4 people were Derek Bell and Carol Gilligan and Anna DeVere Smith and Norman Dawson. Now, Norman was already at the law school and was beginning to develop, with his brilliance, a way to bring the law school out of the deep ethnocentricity of American legal education by bringing in professors from around the world and students from around the world to enlighten our community. And I said to the 4 of them that day, they were puzzled as to why I brought all 4 of them to the same meeting. And I said, what I want you to understand is that the work of the four of you is united by a very, very powerful principle. It's about learning to hear voices you're unaccustomed to hearing. So Derek through the lens of race, Carol through the lens of gender, Anna with her spectacular, what I call theater of listening. I mean, I remember, because Lisa funded Anna's first play that brought her to notoriety.
The Fire in the Mirror?
Fire in the Mirror.
Right.
And which went into Crown Heights after the riots and interviewed 36 people, and then Anna would play them in their own words. So she edited their words and she played them. And I went out for the first performance of that in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I was sitting behind the 2 rows of people that were the 36 people being played.
Oh, wow.
And Lisa and I sat behind them, and we watched their reactions as Anna played each of them. And then flash forward to where I brought Anna and that play to the law school for a Sunday afternoon, followed by a panel run by Rich Gangemi, who had done the investigation for the governor of Crown Heights. And Rich got up in that panel, I'll never forget it, and this is where I connect to what's been said so far. Rich got up and said, I interviewed those people. Now, Rich was one of the most experienced lawyers in his town. He said, I interviewed those people, but I didn't understand what some of them said until today. Because Anna would cause you to love the vessel in that one-act genre of hers in Act 1. And then when she got up and began to speak the words of Al Sharpton, you had learned to love the vessel. And instead of seeing, sure, she puffed her cheeks and her stomach and she made, but you could understand Sharpton the way you hadn't been able to understand it before if you were like me. And this is the comment, and it's really a driving force between a lot of what we're trying to do at the university and in the Silver School. Humankind's at a moment, which to me resonates, as Skip said. People talk about identity. Dan Gilliman, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, apologized to me one day because he said, I didn't realize Lisa was your wife, and I should have expressed my condolence to you. How are you doing? And I explained it to him. He looked at me. He said, you're not processing this, as he listened to me, you're not processing this like a Jew. And I said, well, Dan, that's partly because I'm not a Jew. I'm a Catholic. And he looked at me and he said, I can't tell you how many people have given me lists of Jewish New Yorkers I have to meet, and you're on the list. But for me, as a Catholic and a product of the ecumenical movement, we've come to the time for humankind where we either decide that we're going to insist on looking at life through the one window we're given, or we're going to learn the wonderful joy that John the 23rd taught us about our religion, which is another analogy to bring in here, that if you can enter into a genuine, loving exercise of looking through the many facets of the diamond without giving up your place, if you can learn that listening that was at the theme of that anecdotal meeting, you're in a much better place, which means, in a way, understanding that although we have these multiple identities, the joy really is seeing the kaleidoscope of the interaction of those identities with others.
Absolutely.
Yes.
To us social workers, and by the way, these questions came from our social work community and guided the discussion tonight. But to us social workers, what you're saying sounds great. Ecumenism, multiple identities. I think you implied, Skip and Carol, that context is a lot of has a lot of effect on identity. But in our work, and let's say we're working in a public school, through 12 education, and in a social institution, we know that in certain social contexts and through certain social institutions, kids are labeled, and that labeling sometimes can lead to inequality, inequality of opportunities, inequality of expectations, with some favored and some not favored. For example, it's not only about race, race is important, but today in gender, and it's not only about girls, because there's a growing movement that says boys are being, because they don't sit still and be quiet, are, you know, increasingly having, being viewed as troublemakers in K through 12 school settings. So given that we have these social institutions, I think they have a role in affecting identity. Of course, I'd like to hear your views on it. And I'd also like to ask you to comment on how we can most effectively work with people who are marginalized or excluded, students who are marginalized and excluded because of identity labels that are put onto them that may or may not resonate with their own.
I want to answer that first. First of all, I want to answer your question with a question, which is, what is our investment in labeling people? I mean, who's labeling? I deal with this all the time with my psychology graduate students in my listening class, which is what happens if you start to listen and stop labeling. I mean, I say to them, you know, notice what happens if you substitute curiosity for judgment. Because I think the labeling just absolutely stops listening and curiosity and looking and so forth. And the other thing I wanted to say, because maybe it's a contribution to this conversation, which is there's been really a revolution in the human sciences, absolutely across the human sciences. I mean, it really started in the 1970s, this sort of looking again at psychological development and what were the labels placed on people by psychologists, and then it spread through evolutionary anthropology and biology. And the fact is, this is the good news. That's a Catholic phrase, isn't it?
Christian, he would say.
Christian.
Excuse me. Okay. The good news is the discovery that as humans, I mean, that's an identity. As a species, we are by nature, what differentiates us as humans is our capacity for mutual understanding. And we are born, evolution selected for mutual understanding because it was key to the survival of humans, of hominids, our ancestors as a species. And my view, I think you probably share it, it's absolutely key to our survival as a species now. So if we come into the world with a capacity for mutual understanding, and there's a consensus now, just take a look at all the books on empathy and cooperation by scientists. That is, with a capacity for empathy, mind reading, and cooperation. We're hardwired for this. My colleague David Richards, who I teach with at the law school, he's a constitutional law scholar and moral philosopher. I've gotten him now to watch babies on the subway. And he says, it's amazing. They scan faces, you know, they kind of read other people which faces look friendly. You just go on the subway, try it, you can do it. The question about development has absolutely changed from, you know, how can we overcome self-interest, how can we learn to cooperate and so forth, to what erodes our capacity for mutual understanding? I mean, what stands in the way of our capacity as humans to be empathic with other people, to read other people's minds and so forth? And one of the things is these labels. And it's very interesting, the times at which, I mean, I love the description of, do you remember, Jenny, you read about the Christmas truce in the middle of World War I? You know, where suddenly these fighting armies, this terrible devastation, they heard Christmas carols or lights on the other side, and for 24 hours they sang carols back and forth to one another. And anyone who was in the village here after 9/11, you know, below 14th Street when it was, you know, cordoned off, there was that same atmosphere in the village. Everyone was talking to everybody and helping everybody. So that's our capacity as humans. And then I want to end by just saying, I think it was in today's Times, I read it online last night. Somebody did a study of how to deal with bullying in the schools, which it's certainly time for someone to deal with that, right? We'd all agree with that. Well, instead of punishing the bullies or whatever, they had this idea they would bring a baby into the school. At the beginning of the year, a mother with a 2-month-old baby would come into the classroom. And in response to the baby, all of the children, including the bullies, it brought out a completely different side of them. And they found that this research had huge effects months, maybe years after this happened. So my sense is we've really been on the wrong track. We've been captive to a false story about ourselves. But this new story really gives us a ground for rethinking a lot of the kinds of questions which you're asking us to ask. And I think that's very hopeful.
But we come into the world also with the capacity to dominate and kill each other. And
I actually think that's arguable. We can gain that capacity.
the history of the civilization reflects that capacity.
But that is a capacity which, I mean, I would say if you traumatize people, you can turn them into killers. I think there's been a history, the history of civilization is absolutely linked with the history of trauma. You can read the story of Abraham and Isaac, you can read the story of Agamemnon,
Sure.
and you just go on and on and on and on. And I think we know that now, that the failure, the failure to be cared for leads to an inability to care. And
Right.
so you can make that history go on and on.
But the world that you describe, and we've had this conversation privately, I mean, it sounds wonderful. It's just not real. And
Well, I'm telling you, it is real, so you have to ask a different question.
But let me finish.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Then you can tell me I'm wrong.
Well, then I'll break the tie. Go on.
Yeah, right. And it's precisely because the world is so frightened and brutal that in my own family as an African American, now I just turned 60, I was born in 1950, so that historicizes what I'm about to say. I had a very loving, very stable family. My parents are married forever. My mom died in 1987. My dad's still alive, he's 97. But they were married till my mom died. My brother's an oral surgeon over at Bronx, Lebanon. We have a great family. My mother was a self-esteem machine. Didn't hang black heroes on the wall. She just told us she loved us and that we could do whatever we wanted. And she didn't even, every way that it was possible to reinforce that we were brilliant and beautiful. Now, she might have lied. But you can hypnotize, even a monkey can believe it's beautiful and brilliant. That's what my mother did. And she was counter-labeling.
She was what?
Counter-labeling labels, identities that she knew would be placed upon us as soon as we left her hearth and went into the public school system. Mm-hmm. Now, I was lucky enough to live in the country where there were only a handful of black people. So Brown v. Boards in 1954, schools integrated in my county in 1955 in eastern West Virginia. Not because the white people were so good or liberal, it's just that you didn't have to be an accountant to figure out it was stupid to have a separate school system for these handful of black people. So I started school in 1956, and there were 3 or 4 black kids in a class of 24 kids. And my mother, you see, when the teachers saw us, they were labeling, they were all white teachers. It was 1956, for goodness sake. Mm-hmm. A year before Little Rock, and a year after Montgomery. They were labeling us as little, who knows what they saw. But we had an internal label, my brother and me. An internal identity. I didn't even notice it. I just assumed that I would excel. I assumed that I would be the smartest kid in the class, or at least one of the 2 smartest kids in the class. That's because I was right. But I had been so hypnotized by my mother that I had internalized, I'm using the word label only to follow up on the discourse that you set in motion. But we can't act as if those identities being imposed on us aren't out there, particularly if you are a woman, or you're gay, or you're a person of color, and you're always sword battling. You're always sword battling with stereotypes being foisted upon you. Our mutual colleague, Barbara Johnson, God rest her soul, wrote one of the, she taught with us at Harvard. She was a brilliant literary critic, one of my best friends. She had the most profound definition of a stereotype, which is an extension of a label. She said a stereotype is an already read text. An already read text. So when people see this woman there, African American, they go, I've read that text. If you are Roman Catholic, though you're passing as a Jew, people go, oh, you're a Jew. I know who you are. Or you're a woman, or you're a feminist, or you're a psychologist, or you're a social worker. I know who you are, and you're always countering the labels that people are putting on you. So you have to be, A, aware that labels are real, that they exist, they're not going to go away by wishing them away, and you have to prepare your children to deal with this, to redefine what the society's expectations of you as a Jew, a Roman Catholic, a gay person, a woman, or an African American, or whatever it is might be. I think it's too bad, but that's the way it is. And that's what I try to do in my African American Studies courses. Though most of the kids are taken to a place like Harvard, I have a big lecture course, 70% of the kids are white. But for the black kids who are in those classes, I want them to be aware, no matter what their background is, of two things. That there are 35 million African Americans, which means that 35 million ways to be black. Don't let anybody be a bully and tell you that there's only one way to be black. And secondly, that you are free to function in this society the way you want, except you are going to be bent over one day in your life, no matter how individual you think you are, and you're going to stand up quickly, and your head's going to smack up against something, and that is called anti-black racism. And it's true for every Jew in this room or in this society. They know exactly what I'm talking about. It's true of every gay person, and it's true of every woman. There are these barriers, these labels, and you have to be prepared to know how to right yourself when your head bumps up against one of those awful, awful barriers. And if not, you are going to drown.
So this.
But
So
so we can finish, but you're not a killing machine, are you?
I might be naturally, but I've been socialized out of it. Anyway, let John. It depends on what you mean.
I'm in the wonderful position of being able to concur with each of them and explain to you why, when you put their two thoughts together, they actually get to the truth. But unless you do, you don't. Mm-hmm. So they're each right and they're each wrong, in my view, in a way. Mm-hmm. They're really both right.
Did you all understand what he just said?
So this is the way lawyers talk.
Yeah, I dropped out of law school.
But I'm going to move from being a lawyer to being a theologian very quickly through the vehicle of. I think the three of us all are united in one principle, which ties back, Lynn, to the precise context in which you put this, which was the classroom. I can tell you from deep personal experience, not so much at the college or university level, but in the early years of my teaching, I learned one maxim. I know the two of them embrace because we've talked about it privately. The single most important thing that happens in the classroom is the expectation set by the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And there's a kind of reproductive, self-fulfilling prophecy that comes with that. Now, you can overcome it if you're blessed with the kind of affirming in somewhere in your life mm-hmm. that the three of us have been blessed with. And that goes to great love in your life. It goes to loving parents and so on. Now, how do you put the two thoughts together? Because I think there's a deep truth that each of you has articulated. I would put it together in the context of a view of the world that goes back deeply into my own experience as a Catholic in the 50s and 60s. Moving from a world where the identity was we got all the right answers and anybody who doesn't agree with exactly the answers we're given is labeled worthy of hell. Mm-hmm. Extra ecclesia nulla salus. Daniel Berrigan said those words to me. Now, how did we move from that? We moved through it in part through the wonderful experience of being on the Fordham campus when Teilhard de Chardin was there. So, you know, I would say that humankind is in a constant stage of evolution. Now, this is just pure Teilhard. It's in a constant stage of evolution, and we've been groping with certain foreshadowing events. For Christians, the great foreshadowing event of what we can be is in Christ. Okay, but take Christ as simply the man who became God. Okay, so he showed us what we could be. And the question is, as we evolve in a kind of spiritual evolution, how do we put together these primordial forces? You know, how because we have the essence that you describe, but the reality that Skip describes. And we haven't gotten there yet. And I think the moment I actually wrote something the day after 9/11, which was a pastoral letter to the community. You could probably still get it on my website. It's called The Moral Surge. And I felt that in that moment below 14th Street, to which Carol alluded, we were at the brink of moving through a critical threshold in the evolution of humankind. You could feel humankind, as we incarnated it here, operating at a higher plane. And for a while, Rudy Giuliani had the right voice. And then he kind of lost it in his own ambition of wanting to be reelected. And, you know, I'm the only guy who can keep us here. And it became all about, it lapsed back into the fear and the we and the they and this kind of Orwellian security mentality that now, for the last decade, has dominated America.
Yeah, reality came back.
Yeah, well, I'm not so sure reality came back, but I would say that we saw a glimpse of what we could be, and that what the key is, because this to me is a different version of Pascal's wages, Skip. That you know, are you going to bet on the fact that we can get that essence to dominate, or you're going to say, hey, millennia show otherwise. The person of faith, in my view, in what we are, who says that we've got a mind that gives us this capacity, Carol described that, and a soul that calls us to it, is the kind of person that says, I accept your reality, I see it, I accept this terrible, deleterious effect of these labels. And how do we move beyond that? We move beyond that by changing our vantage point. You know, and frankly, that's what calls, I think, most of us to education. It's what calls us to social work. It's what calls us to this particular version of a university we're trying to create. I think New York City is the first experiment in this, frankly. Okay, we're the first city that has all the countries in the world represented in its neighborhoods. And I think New York City is proof that there's a shot. I wouldn't say that it's going to happen, and it's not that the state of is, but there's a shot.
But the truth is, I mean, we're talking about these issues as if individual will is the most important thing. And individual will is very, very important. Don't get me wrong. But so are socioeconomic factors.
Yes.
I was very careful to say I came from a very strong family. My father worked 2 jobs. He worked in the paper mill in the day, was a janitor in the evening. So we were the richest black people, the richest colored people in Piedmont, West Virginia. Now, here we would have been living in the inner city or, you know, in some tenement. There we had our own house. You know, it was all relative. I didn't know I was poor till I went to Yale.
But that told you really quickly, right?
But I wasn't poor in my own head. When you have, I saw a statistic this morning, 72% of all black children are born to an unwed mother. Now, how are you going to produce the people out of that?
Right.
That I don't care about the propensity for people to see.
Supporting those mothers.
Huh?
Supporting those mothers.
We need.
I mean, that's how you're going to do it. The way you're going to do it is to say,
there's not that much money in this society.
oh,
What we
there's
need,
so much money in this
Hey,
society. It's just
okay,
not in the hands of those women.
Put it this way. Okay, Not only is that true, Professor, it's not going to be in the hands of those women. Was anybody, were you all asleep at the last election? I mean, hello, what are you talking about? What we have to do, if you're standing within the black community like I do, and you might not feel comfortable saying this because you're not, that's not one of your labels. But when I give a talk to black audiences, I say, you got to stay in school. The most important thing for you to do is to learn the ABCs. That no white man is going to come in on a white horse to save us anymore. We have to save ourselves. George Wallace is dead. No white man makes you have a baby out of wedlock. No white man makes you decide that getting straight A's in school is white. That is disgusting. That is disgusting. If Jews had those kind of beliefs, Jews have been dead back in Egypt. And we would not have made it through slavery. The blackest thing you could be when I was growing up was to be a black doctor or a black lawyer, not some hip-hop artist. Our people have lost the way, and you have to have the courage. Let me put it this way. People like me have to have the courage to stand up within our community and say, all that other stuff is good and fine and necessary. But charity, like criticism, or responsibility, like criticism, starts at home. You know, everybody likes sex. You don't have to have a baby. You don't have to have a baby out of wedlock because you know, you need to stay in school. You need to disprove these racist labels on our people. You don't need to reinforce them. If that makes me a conservative, then I'm a conservative. I don't care because I care about my people. And until we have the courage within the race to stand up and say, take responsibility for your actions, and I will go out and kick the white racists in the behind as viciously as I can, but I'm not going to do that if you're not taking care of your responsibility at home. That's how we produce the great African American people, and I'm afraid that we are losing it because we're making excuses all the time.
Right, but nobody.
Now, that's how I feel.
But Skip, but nobody here made an excuse. You're completely right in giving that talk, as you describe it, but it is not a corollary of that talk to relieve all of us in all of our multiple identities of the obligation of being there for all of us.
True.
So you cannot.
But there are not enough resources to be there and save everybody.
Well, it doesn't take
every
an awful
social
lot
worker
to,
in this room knows that. You cannot. There's not. You know it.
Quite the
And it's
contrary.
painful.
Quite the contrary.
Excuse
Excuse me, Dean.
No.
Was that?
But we could redistribute that more effectively.
Look. I'm not urging that everybody take a vow of poverty, okay? But for 15 years, 100 hours a week, without getting paid a nickel, I was out in Brooklyn working with kids who wouldn't have gone to college, who ended up going to college.
That's true.
Because it was rewarding, okay? Mm-hmm. And the social workers that are here live with the fact that they're undervalued by society in monetary terms,
right?
Just as teachers do in the K through 12 system. But that doesn't mean that you don't get some of the best and brightest, and an increasing number, I would observe, in an optimistic note,
no question,
called to those vocations.
Right.
And what you say is true, but it's also important that we begin at the very least, because it doesn't cost a nickel in terms of society. We got to start honoring people,
no question,
who do those things, no matter what their identity
and pay
is.
them, and we have to pay them.
If we can pay them, we should pay them too.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. Let me take this tiger by the tail, and our time is ticking right along, and we want to honor people's
We don't have another hour?
And time. But one idea that aroused a lot of enthusiasm among our three conversationalists here is to take a couple of questions from the audience. So we probably only have time for one, maybe two at the most questions, but I want to invite audience members to step up to the mic if you have a question that you'd like to ask our esteemed panel. And while you're walking up to the mic, those of you who might want to ask a question, let me just say that I think you've touched upon the, the tensions that we as social workers work on, the capacity of human beings and a moral sense of a righteous, positive, ecumenical rearing of children and people, but at the same time the societal barriers that hold us back, the importance of family, that importance of that early nurturance that you referred to, all things that I could just tell, connected with people in the room. But I see we have a question. Dr. Robert Hawkins.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say really quickly, I know we don't have a lot of time, that Professor Gates, Professor Gilligan, this is a unique honor, so thank you for being here.
Thank you.
President Sexton, Dean Videka, it's the usual honor. It's not unique, it's just the usual one. I do have a question. I'm very interested, as being a member of the social work faculty and thinking about the work that I do. I understand what you are saying, Professor Gates, speaking of the Black community, but very often a teenager, a teen girl becomes a teen mom because being a mom or becoming a mom is the only positive label she can get.
I'm very familiar with that.
Because of structural racism, because of the limitations in the community. So I would love to hear you speak about just some of your views on the structural nature.
Right.
Because I absolutely agree about the behavioral issues you've laid out.
Right.
But there are structural issues as well.
First of all, you're absolutely right. I think that is what many teenage mothers feel, that this is the only way they get affirmation. But I don't know about you, but I think you're obviously a very intelligent person. I think I was pretty smart when I was 18, but I wasn't prepared to be a father, right? No matter how intelligent I am, and neither is that ideal teenager that we're talking about. The causes of poverty are structural and behavioral. We need to fight both equally. They are mutually reinforcing. I give them 50-50. But the stance I was taking, I absolutely believe that. I think that they are, it depends on the day. It would be hard to put them on a scale and decide how to divide it up. But for the sake of argument, just say they're equal. You got to put people to work. You got to give them a chance to have a realistic job and not just flipping burgers at McDonald's. They have to be able to be invested in the system, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, you have to have the will to get up to learn your ABCs. Both things have to happen at the same time. As an African American, deeply concerned about my own community, right? I don't see any. If you could send me a link to where hope is in the United States Congress to address the structural causes of poverty, I haven't got that. It hadn't popped up on my internet yet, and particularly in the last week, right? So what do you do to black kids? You just keep blaming the system? Well, we could blame the system, we could wolf on them, we could say, hey, but in the meantime, you got to learn your ABCs. What I'm doing, I'm busy developing a curriculum. John's very familiar with this, using the genealogy and genetic stuff that I do in my PBS documentaries to revolutionize how we teach science and social studies, particularly history, to inner city brown and black kids. Obviously, I believe that you could go in and make a difference. I just wanted to provide some balance up here with these two liberals. Like Airy Fairy is going to fly away. We can all leave here feeling good, but that doesn't, you are in the trenches. You know how hard it is. My job is to stand up and say, no, you need to stop making excuses. It's tough love, man. You need to stop making excuses and learn your ABCs. Stop telling me about white people, racism, and the Civil War and slavery. Learn the ABCs. Now, I'm trying to be a corrective, not just here, but with all my work and my public statements. But what I believe officially is that the causes of poverty are structural behavioral. And we have to work hard to change the society, but that's going to take a long time. What's quicker? Teaching somebody to read and write, revolutionize their curriculum by teaching them how to do their genealogy and their genetics, or getting the Tea Party to embrace the right of everybody to have a job and to have health care? Please, hold your breath. You tell me which is easier. So that's where I'm coming from. In an ideal world, I'd say yeah. But from my bully pulpit, I'm standing up and saying, black people, you got to try to free yourself. You got to believe in this. You got to believe in yourself. You got to study. You got to try to make it, because that's what made our people survive. That's what made our people endure, and that's what will make our people great again. That's what I actually believe. Is that okay?
Before we close, I'd like some reporter to record someplace in the public record that Skip Gates referred to me as a liberal. I'm to the left of Skip Gates, just so everybody understands.
Anybody believes that, you're crazy. I'll sell you a bridge to go into Brooklyn.
We'll take just one more question if you'd like to ask your question,
You
and
are
then
to the
we'll
left
close
of
the conversation.
I'm a
Hi,
conservative.
I'm Steve Crone. I'm a proud graduate of the School of Social Work, 93. Family of been in Manhattan since 1846 as a Jewish family. And I want to address President Sexton. Thank you, all of you honored guests, and Dean, it's always nice to see you. But this notion that you have that somehow the community after 9/11 here was a unique paradigm or some, of evolution. When you look at other communities, when you look at simple communities that develop anywhere in the world without the invasion of Western money or our ideals or morals, people do take care of each other. And my basic family values, I guess, coming from a good medical family as well, if we're not here to help each other, then what are we here for? And one of the things you didn't touch on that I'd like to make an observation with my clients, in all the hard neighborhoods in this metropolitan area, some of these women who are having children, they're in an object relations point of view, they're creating an object that's going to give them unconditional love because they didn't get unconditional love. Forgetting about this identity as a mother and the status, and you sit in a treatment room out in, I did in New Hope and the Bushwick, or so, you see a young teenager with a baby carriage and a boyfriend, and that's going to keep going on and on and on, unless you do what you're saying, Professor Gates, is I change the role model, change what's of value, change what they're striving for. But this notion that we're going to be not going to, want to fight each other. I mean, the world seems to me is always going to go to hell in a handbasket. And as a kid of the 60s who put his body on the line on the Summit of Montgomery March, that's very disappointing. So my question, I guess, is to you, President Sexton, why do you think that New York somehow, after 9/11 was different than the New Guinean, families and communities that have not been touched by our civilization at all? What's different? How has that evolved and we should evolve?
Well, first, I must not have expressed myself as clearly as I might have, because I didn't claim some kind of uniqueness for New York. I claimed that you could feel humankind in that moment operating at a higher plane. Quite the contrary, the basic forces of evolution, biological, and if you accept the Teilhardian model, which is what I was specifically embracing, is that a possibility, let's call it, emerges, diverges, and at some point then converges at a higher level for a new possibility. And there's a popping up all over the place. And I'm speaking here of changes that occur not in a year or a month, but over centuries and millennia. And I would, you want a great example that I didn't know about when I wrote the piece about New York, was the idea that on the continent of Australia, which I've come to know relatively recently, until the Occidentals arrived with their notions of sovereignty and property, you had 26 language groups that worked on a principle of hospitality and welcomeness. It was a great adumbration. It looked at the arc of millennia of what humankind could be. So I would embrace your examples as further evidence of the fact that there is in potentia in humankind the possibility to overcome the obvious evidence that we also have a deep capacity to go in exactly the opposite direction. And we've got places like Kosovo where people are still hating each other over a battle that happened 400 or 500 years ago. And religion, by the way, spirituality, can be a force on either side of that equation. Okay, what I was saying was that something that those of us here felt on those days after September 11th connected to the kinds of experiences you're talking about, and it causes in me an optimism. It does not cause in me a Pollyannism, however, but I'm not going to relieve us of the burden to act to that higher self. And that's why I said to Skip, he should not, in giving his speech, relieve all of us of the obligation to see and celebrate the goodness in each other.
Exactly. We were kind to each other. You felt it on the subways. People had manners. People were kind. When you bumped into somebody,
And
there was no bumping without somebody saying, "Excuse me," and that was unusual. And that went on for about 2 months.
it was unusual here,
Not
and,
just below
and with
14th
different
Street.
leadership, we could have had it go on, perhaps, and endure.
Exactly.
On that note,
Some people feel a need to fight to get that, which is one definition of revolution. Others, like my high school English teacher Daniel Berrigan, say, you know, it's just the opposite. It's the need. It's the need, and it sounds simple-minded, but it's the need just to embrace the positive. That does not abandon, as Skip would remind us very quickly, the need to be responsible for ourselves and our own advancement. It just means being conscious of your social duty to others. And to come back to where we started, which is the celebration of this school, it's about shame and honor. You know, it doesn't cost a nickel to shame and honor. And if the people in this room collectively decided they would shame those who act badly in this regard and honor those who act well, like social workers and teachers and others in society who say excuse me when they bump into somebody instead of growling, we would all be better off. I'm on that side of what I call Pascal's wager, because to be on the other side is just to give up too easily.
and I agree for once with Professor.
There we go. Please join me in thanking President Sexton, Skip Gates, and Carol Gilligan for a vibrant and stimulating conversation.